Hey guys, it's Wes Seiler here from the Burkean Conservative, and I'm so grateful and honored to be joining you tonight. It's also a very tough night. I know most people have seen the news of what's been going on in terms of the protest, turn riots up in D.C., and a lot of the violence that broke out there today. And I just want to take a few minutes to talk through that and to give you our perspective. I felt like it was very important for us to do this. Normally, we do our shows on Sunday nights. We have a great time with our Conservatism on Tap show, where we get to just talk about conservative theory and movies and books and things that we enjoy. We also have our Refounding Fathers show on Sundays, where I get to join a liberal and a libertarian and discuss different politics and philosophies and things like that. But tonight is more of kind of an impromptu show where we felt it was important to speak directly on what's occurring in DC. As you can see here, I have a little agenda to go through, and then I'm going to be bringing on some guests to the show. But I wanted to talk through some of these major points and give you our perspective. And if you've got comments on that, feel free to let us know. We'll be happy to address them. But the first thing is, as this crisis takes over the news, it takes over our Facebook feeds and everything else. There's always a lot of confusion with something like this. And this particular incident is no different than other crises we've seen, where there's a lot of information and some misinformation and a lot of confusion, frankly, going around all at the same time. And so in terms of what do we know, frankly, we don't know a lot. We know that the president was at a protest this morning, a rally to get his supporters together, to get Republicans, conservatives, everyone who supported him together, because there was this crucial ceremony that was going down as Mike Pence and the Senate and the Congress got all together to be able to certify the election. And there's a lot of consternation with that because of the appearance of fraud, the potential for that to be part of the election process, the president talking about that endlessly, and then many, many people believing that the election was therefore illegitimate, despite the fact that many courts have ruled on this. The Supreme Court refused to hear cases on it. We're still at this situation where a large number of people believe the election was illegitimate. So Trump was putting pressure on Mike Pence to try to overturn the certification of the election, which he was about to do. And so several hours later, after these rallies had concluded, suddenly there were reports of violence occurring at the Capitol building itself, to the point that people were breaking in. They got into the chambers. Senator Langford was speaking, had to be evacuated. There was also bomb threats to both the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee. There have been reports of people who had firearms, magazines, and other things at these protests. And then there's also been reports that at least one person has been killed. So again, sorting through all of the different details, who's responsible, to what extent, has been a question. It's certainly going to be debated for the next several months. But really what is at the forefront of this is violence. And not the first time that we have seen violence, of course, in this country because of political protest or political issues. We've also seen that with this past year alone in other causes. And not just, of course, by right-wing groups, but also by left-wing groups and all kinds of other things. So not the first time, but definitely shocking for a lot of people because it's happening in such a public place, a place that many people have been to in D.C. in terms of being, they're on vacation, seeing their congressman, seeing their senator, sitting in the gallery, those type of things, places that people tend to frequent for vacations, that the type of thing, seeing that on TV, and then a place that has a lot of history being the Capitol building itself. Yeah, a lot of discussion, a lot of questions, and a lot of confusion in this. And when we bring up this question of violence, I want to talk briefly about when is violence justified? When does this kind of thing happen? Because that's what I see already in my newsfeed on Facebook, getting comments and questions already about this. Some people saying, violence is part of the American way, and it's really just always been part of our culture. And other people who are horrified at what's happening and saying this is not at all, what is part of our culture. So I want to lay that down. I want to lay that perspective down before we go any further as to what we, at the Burkean Conservative see on this issue and where we stand. And when it comes to the notion of violence, there is a place for it. I believe that as a Christian. I believe that as a conservative. There is times when violence is necessary. If you've been watching the show frequently, at all in the past few months, I'm a military guy, and with 10 years of experience in the military, I've had some things that have been very difficult. Certainly were violent in nature. I've witnessed things that were violent in nature, and have experience with that overseas. And I can tell you, for me, it's never something that I enjoy. And it's never something that I relish doing or that I want to brag about. And frankly, I don't talk about it as often on this show as I could, because it is a tough act. But at the same time, it can be a necessary one. We certainly have had to do that to protect things. And so I understand the concern that many people have about violence, and is it the proper means when we look at these elections, and the possibility of fraud and that type of thing, and where they're coming from as well. We have to resort to this. But then at the same time, there is the emotion of rage and anger and just a chaotic level of hatred that can be part of violence if you let it go too far. It is the difference between violence for justice's sake, violence that is in response to something and is reciprocal and measured and purposeful, versus violence for its own sake, or violence that gets out of hand. It's the difference between having to put a dog down that is sick, which you have to do, and it's tough to do, but it's necessary, and it's the right thing, versus violence in which you enjoy it. And I've seen that in my life many times, that line, and how clear it can be in different situations. And really what I look at whenever you have a situation like this is, where are we at with that line? And when I've already seen video feed, and I've seen several of the up close captures of what's been going on, and you see people screaming at each other, swearing at police officers, throwing things, threatening people with guns. And when I see that type of thing, it leads me to believe that the violence that's happening here is not the proper kind. It's not for justice's sake. And I've already heard people talk about how it's possible that people infiltrated this movement, things like that. When you have a movement that becomes violent, it's very quick to get out of hand in situations like this, when there's this many people and there's the opportunity. And there are people, frankly, who crave it. And that's what we are seeing. So whether you are on the right or the left, whether you're moderate, whether you don't even like politics or you love it, if we can agree this situation attracted that type of violence, and that it doesn't belong in our culture, it doesn't belong in any political movement in America, then I think that's a great starting point. And that's what I see. It's one thing to protest. That's, to me, is a very American thing. It's to question your political leaders, to question your processes, is a great thing. But then to start threatening people at gunpoint, to start delivering bombs, pipe bombs to the political offices around the Capitol, to be scaring people, and to be attacking law enforcement that's simply there doing their job, scaring people, right? When we get to that point, regardless of your political movement, that's something that we have to condemn. So looking at this situation, and again, it's not an isolated situation. There have been many, many protests and threats and acts of violence in our country over the past few years because of politics. We have to ask ourselves, if this is getting to this point, if we're seeing this with many rogue groups and that type of thing, what is the answer? What is the actual answer to be able to heal our country and to be able to start walking back from this precipice of violence and hate and wrath? And that's where I look at our show and our channel. I look at what we've been doing over the past year as we've set up these live streams, as we've had guests on our show, we've interviewed people, and I've taken flack at times because people say, well, why would you talk to this person, or why would you interview that person? And it's because we have been trying to create a civil discourse, not where, my beliefs are destroyed or demolished, but that they are shared. And then at the same time, I actively listen to someone who's different, and we push back on each other. We question each other, but we do so in a spirit of camaraderie and of mutual respect. And I think that's what's lost. So many times I've been talking to people over the past year. They tell me, Wes, I honestly don't know anybody who believes differently than me. I really don't have that many people in my life who have a different political viewpoint. Where can I go to be able to get that? We want to create a space in this website with our project to be able to do that, to have liberals, libertarians, moderates, conservatives like myself, and be able to share our ideas and to demonstrate what civility looks like so that we don't end up continually in situations like this. Because while it may be American to protest, it may be American to dump tea in the sea, to fight the British, to defend our shores, it's also American to come together in places like the Capitol building and Constitution Hall and many others, and to be able to struggle with people who disagree with us, but to do so in a peaceful fashion. America wasn't just won because we fought a war against the British. America wasn't just won because we took up arms. America was also won because liberals and conservatives and moderates and people of different religions and beliefs came together and struggled for hours and hours and days and months to be able to put together documents that are sacred to us that hammered out things that we could all agree on, that we still work on today. And if we lose sight of that important process and we only focus on the violence and the danger and all of those things, then we lose the ability to have this conversation that allows America to continue to be. And we find ourselves in a state of constant warfare. And so, having said all of that, I want to clarify what this channel is about, where we stand on this issue, and why what I see here, well, with what we do, is in a small way a counter-revolution to what's happening. If you think that this was a great thing, that people took their protests to this level, right? Then you may not find a home here. But if you think there's a better way, if you think it's possible for people to have a civil conversation, even if we get upset at times, but to be able to come back and work on our different ideas and expose themselves to different schools of thought and come away smarter with more relationships and more to think about in your own life, then this is the place for you. And I want to demonstrate that with the rest of our time. I appreciate you listening, kind of to this monologue. If you've got comments, feel free to leave them here and we'll try to get to those. But what I want to do is I want to introduce a panel here of different guys who have been on this show for some time. And again, they reflect the type of perspectives and different beliefs that make up the diversity of our country today. So first off, all the way to the left there is my brother, John. He's been on this show really from the beginning and helped me build this project. John is a conservative like myself and a Republican, and we tend to share very similar views. I know, John, and I have you on the show almost every Sunday talking about movies and everything else. So grateful to have you back, John. Yeah, and I'm working on your audio here. Let me bring you on. All right, go ahead, bud.
Yep. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing me on, Wes. It means a lot to be here, even if it's such a tragic time.
Yeah. And then Christopher Souza. Christopher started commenting on our page about maybe, I think, 2 years ago when we were just a small Facebook page and just starting out. And I've just respected his viewpoint so much and how he continually keeps coming back to the page. We've had disagreements. Chris, you can speak for yourself, obviously, on those. But I know that we see politics differently. Chris being a liberal, we see the different parties differently. Chris being a Democrat, and I think we have some spiritual differences as well. But I have always appreciated your perspective on a show because you always handle yourself with dignity. The times that we do get upset at each other, we always take a day and then come back and respect each other's disagreement, no matter what it's on. And it always brings so much to the show to be able to show people that there are liberals, Democrats like yourself who we can have a conversation with. So many times I talk to conservatives who think every single liberal is a communist who wants to burn America to the ground. And not just you, Chris, but so many people on our page today represent something completely different from that. People who love this country as much as any conservative I know, they just see it differently. And out of that discussion that we have, there's so much goodness that comes. It allows me to see the world through your eyes and to be able to figure out, maybe there's some things that I haven't thought about. Maybe there's some ways that I can articulate conservatism to liberals differently, and it'll make more sense even if they still disagree. So welcome, Chris. Thanks. Always great to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here as always with you and Kyle. I always learn great things from you. This is my first time on with John, so I enjoy hearing his perspective as well on conservatism on tap, which is another great show of yours. So thank you for your very inspiring words in your monologue earlier, as well as your military service. So thank you.
Yeah. So, and then Kyle Walton. Kyle Walton's also been on the show for a long time. Kyle, I've known you for years, going back to when we went to church together, back when I lived in Virginia, and I know now you're in North Carolina. And Kyle tends to represent more of a libertarian side, which I thought was so important because when you think about libertarianism, it may be a relatively small party, but it's a strong belief that so many people are attracted to. I posted a couple of things earlier today that was more libertarian in nature, and people loved it. It's this really important perspective that calls us to focus on individual liberty and freedom and to take those ideals seriously. And it's a growing movement, I believe. I mean, you look at, senators in Congress now who identify as libertarians and many others. And I'm grateful because between, Chris bringing the liberal side, Kyle bringing the libertarian side, John and myself bring the conservative side, it brings so much out of the discussion that we wouldn't have otherwise. So grateful to have you on as well, Kyle. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Wes. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So having this different perspective, represented from all these different groups, I kind of ask you, and we can kind of go down the line here and feel free to ask each other questions if you like, but just give me your general impression. You just kind of heard what I said, in terms of how I see this as a Christian, as a conservative, where I draw the line on violence and how I see, anger and rage as that, determining marker. And that really is where, I start to turn on this and see it as a problem, as I would with pretty much any situation that gets to this level. But let me know, when you saw the events today, were you surprised or not at all? Do you think that, there something like this is going to happen for the next several weeks, or was it isolated? So start with you, John, and then we can just go down the line here. Go ahead, guys.
Well, first off, I think the year 2021 is the wrong year to stop drinking. So a resolution to drink more for our conservatism on taps in the future. But in all seriousness, with this, I was shocked as to how far it got into the Senate. Yeah. And to have to, sit there and to watch, alongside my 6-year-old daughter, and she's wondering who got shot. And, she's seeing an image of this person, being rushed out. And she's asking these questions like, why is this happening? And like, where to begin, because you want to say like, this should have been anticipated. This should not have happened. And yet you feel that there's so much hate, there's so much anger, and where do you even begin to criticize who's to blame or why it happened? If anything, what this whole night has confirmed to me is that people do not have a space for debate. There are no suitable spaces for debate. Social media has failed in that regard. I think just civil discourse and personal relationships have not succeeded, whether due to COVID or just, lack of connections that people make that are meaningful. That is kind of how I ended up explaining it to my daughter, is that people end up losing connections to each other. And as a result, they begin to disagree and they think that they are on the right side. And the people who feel that they are most powerful at the time can impose that on somebody else. And that's how you get this. And I said it was tragic. It's not exactly tragic. It's a terrible event. It's a horrendous, I think, insurrection of democracy and of the system. I was very encouraged by the Senate speeches. I started tuning into those late in the evening. And I just think that it would be such a victory if unanimously all the senators could gather around and say, yes, this is the truth. Joe Biden elected, he's president-elect, he is our president. And it would be such a refutation of all the lies and the misinformation that has gone throughout this country. If you have a whole Congress that says, We will call out the lies. We will call out the misinformation. If you want the truth, here it is. The entire United States says this is the president, and that is how it's going to be.
Yeah.
That's what I wish would happen.
Yeah. I mean, I think when you talk about misinformation, I think that's really what people struggle with more than anything today, myself included. And there's so many different information sources out there. There's so many places to get a particular perspective. And one of the benefits of being able to have different people speak from different perspectives is that they're getting their news from somewhere different. They're seeing an entirely different set of facts, if you will, and encountering that, and not just shouting them down or telling them why they're wrong, but show me where you got your information from. Oh, it came from CNN. Oh, it came from Vox. Well, don't just dismiss it because that's a liberal institution, right? Don't just dismiss it because that's not where you got, your information from. I heard about this experiment in the Northeast where they took a group of people and they asked them, where do you get your news from? And then they had them spend a week watching news daily for about an hour from the opposite stream. So if you were watching it from Fox or Newsmax, they got it from MSNBC, right? And then vice versa. And after a week, they had them record their thoughts. And people described it as if they were on a different planet. It wasn't just that it was a different take on news. It was different news entirely, different perspective about what's important. And if you think about just the nature of news, there's so much going on in the world, especially today, that's captured by everybody's phone and blog and Facebook and everything else, that news organizations have to determine what they consider to be breaking news. And so there's so much that you're missing out on. And so as we talk to people, it's the clearest and easiest way to be able to access more information than what your particular perspective gets access to. That's what comes out of it. It's not just, hey, I get some of the information. I get the person's entire perspective. And then they come at me with all kinds of different sources that I can look at if I'm willing to listen. And that's where we have to get to. You have to realize that as conservative as I am, as Christian as I am, I want to hear from someone who is atheist and liberal, because you know what? They may see my faith from the outside and say, hey, you talk about this Jesus guy, but I also saw you doing X, Y, and Z. And I'll be like, you know what? That's totally right. I got to stop doing that. I got to stop acting that way. I got to stop treating people that way. And maybe somebody in my church won't be quick to call me on that. Maybe they didn't even notice it because they're not in the same circles that I am during the week, right? These blind spots develop. And sometimes people from a completely different perspective can be the ones that bring it to us. And that's what I see missing, John, is that we are starting to think that our worldview answers everything. And no other worldview can possibly compete. And if you get your news from someplace else besides where I get mine from, then I shouldn't give you the time of day and I should spend all my time talking. And so we've got to encourage that. So Chris, I want to hear from you as well. We're spending a lot of time as conservatives talking about this, working our way through it. But at the same time, violence isn't limited to just conservatives and Republicans and Trump supporters. There's been accusations against the left, for years, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, that type of thing. So again, this is not an isolated event. So I just want to hear your take in general on where do you see politics? Where do you see the discussion between right and left? And where does it need to go?
Certainly, yeah. To go back to your initial question of, when is violence justified? I think it has to be very rare circumstances in which violence is justified as a political act. I did not support the violence that broke out at several Black Lives Matter protests over the summer, despite my agreement with the goals of Black Lives Matter and the problem of police brutality, especially against minorities. But I think if you look at the founders in the Revolutionary War, their big objection was, no taxation without representation. Well, these people who stormed the Capitol today, not only are they well represented in Congress, the argument could certainly be made that they are more well represented than other parts of the country. The Electoral College is designed in a way that puts more weight on the white rural vote. Whether that's by design or not, that is the reality and the impact. Up until recently, they had control of all three branches of government.
Yeah.
So, as you both allude to, this protest and the eventual riots were just motivated purely by lies. And I think if you look at other groups in America who have truly been disenfranchised, Black people were enslaved and subject to Jim Crow laws, and they did not storm the Capitol. Gays could not marry or adopt, and they did not storm the Capitol. Women could not own property or vote for a very long time. They did not storm the Capitol. Trump supporters lost one election that in many ways was slanted in their favor, if you look at the way our system is designed. And they stormed the Capitol. So it was based on lies. Jonathan raises a good point about how wonderful it would be to see everyone reject these lies and conspiracy theories and proclaim the fact that Joe Biden did win this election. I was happy to see no less than Kelly Loeffler say that he had planned on objecting to the certification of the vote and then changed her mind due to the events of today. Unfortunately, you saw someone like Josh Hawley, who is still continuing to spread misinformation about voter fraud during his speech tonight, even after the events of today. So it is discouraging, but hopefully there will be enough Republicans who will stand up and say that what happened here is wrong, it's gotten out of control, and it's got to stop.
Yeah, I don't want to make light of anything that happened, but I want to compare this to a sports analogy just to help people kind of understand what's been going on in a general sense. Is if you imagine like a football game, right? And someone makes a bad call, right? A referee, that type of thing. And because some player targeted or, did whatever, pass interference, that type of thing. And the referees review it, right? And then they come back with a call that you don't like, right? We're at the point where people are not just throwing bottles and that type of thing, but they or just expressing their displeasure, but they're getting on the field, right? And that's where you start to draw the line. It's like I've seen that, as a sports fan, is sitting there in the audience, and I'm like, are you serious? After they reviewed it, they still didn't get the call right. And I think the important point here is there has been some evidence of isolated fraud and things like that. We've talked through that on our shows. But there's a way to address that. There's a court system in place. So it's not left up to me or you, Chris, or Joe Schmo, or even the people that were running for office. There is a court system, an independent branch of government filled by many people who were proposed by the Trump administration and the Federalist Society, bipartisan in nature. There's people in there that are Democrat as well, but people that are supposed to rise above the politics of the day, most importantly, the Supreme Court. And these courts have reviewed the evidence that Trump lawyers have brought and said, this is not right. What the evidence that you've brought is circumstantial, isolated, and it doesn't amount to any systemic fraud. Now, as someone who's a Republican, I don't particularly like that. That doesn't make me happy. But that's the system in place, right? At what point do we shut down the entire football game? And I think that's what's happening, is people are getting to a point where they're never going to trust any election again. They don't trust the court system. They don't trust anybody but Donald Trump himself. And when he says, never give up, never concede, that doesn't mean, hey, let's run for office again and try, to do better at this. It means do whatever you have to do. It's how they interpret it, which maybe that's what Trump, maybe it's not. We can agree or disagree on that. Doesn't matter to me. But to get to a point where you're just over the entire game, right? That's going further, because bringing it back to politics, it's not a game, right? That's just an analogy. Now we're actually talking about people's lives. We're talking about the welfare of our country, the future of our country, and the examples that we're making for our kids. That's when it starts to get real, And so as I look into this, I hope that people can take a step back and think about this. Even if there was fraud in the country, go and look at the court system and what they did. Take the time, again, to research it for yourself. Talk to people, who are experts in this. Find not just the information that you want to hear, but the actual cases. And if you have trouble doing that, listen to our show, because we'll be happy to go through it. And when you start to do that, you realize this isn't just a simple act of, hey, there was fraud and everybody's trying to cover it up. This has been a discussion ongoing throughout the country as to exactly what happened here, there, Dominion Software Systems, this, and, someone planting votes, that. These are investigated. There's a way to do that. And if you start to overthrow that entire system, you overthrow exactly what our founders established. And it may not be what you like. It may not be the best, Referees are infallible. Supreme Court justices are infallible. But it's the best system in the world at preventing this and preserving what is special about this country. And if we overthrow that, we're far less like the American revolutionaries and far more like French Jacobins or the communists that all conservatives can't stand. The people that storm, buildings and just start slaughtering people, right? And we're starting to see evidence that we're heading towards that point, and that is what is dangerous, regardless of who it's coming from. Antifa, Republican, doesn't matter. The fact that we're creating that type of space where that could happen is a problem. So, Kyle, what do you make of all this? There's not a whole lot of talk of libertarians. I saw Rand Paul's stance on this, but as someone who doesn't really identify too strongly with either political party, seeing all this go down, I just want to get your general take, man, on your perspective.
Well, I think I probably have the most, I wouldn't call it radical, but I guess I have the probably the biggest difference of opinion than you guys. Obviously, I don't think that reckless violence is a good thing. I don't think that the wanton destruction of property is a good thing. But at the same time, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing for politicians to be reminded that the people have the power. That is a good thing in my mind as a libertarian. Now, of course, there is a time to display that power and a process to do that. And I don't think today was it. In fact, today, just like I would argue that the protests, the BLM protests were in the past, were just manipulation. They were playing on people's emotions and gaslighting people to react a certain way. I think that's the same thing we saw today that we saw with the BLM protest. But, I think the bigger point here is that people are no longer tied to ideas or ideology, right? They're tied to party and they're tied to politician. Furthermore, and not to get too deep into the theology talk here, but part of the Imago Dei is the foundational premise of natural rights in the Judeo-Christian worldview. It's the idea that we were made in the image of God. But one of these foundational premises is that humans are made to worship. It's part of who we are as humans. And as religion has continued to wane in public life, that part of our humanity that longs to worship, that was made to worship, that doesn't just go away, right? We fill it with other things to worship. And that's what we see on both the right and the left today. I think that people have made a religion out of politics, complete with holy places and Messiah figures. And that's why so many people on both the right and the left are incapable of criticism of their political viewpoints. They see it as an attack on their religion. And the fervor with which people defend their religion is the same we're seeing with politics. And the same atrocities that can be carried out in the name of religion can certainly be carried out in the name of politics. I think we've already begun to see that.
No, it's a lot there, man. The first thing is, talking about the people, right? And, the larger mass of individual citizens, residents of this country, people that pay their taxes, work their jobs, raise their kids, in this country. I was reading a book the other day that said we have when it comes to e pluribus unum, we have a lot of pluribus and not enough unum, right?
I've heard that too, yeah.
Who are these people? And going back to one of the comments that I made in the entry to this is so many people today tell me, I only end up talking to people that I already agree with or who already share my beliefs. But some of that is technology. Facebook is very quick to just show you the news feed of people who live and think and act like you do. If you do this on Instagram or Twitter, it will very quickly show you what you want to see. You have to work hard to be able to find people out who disagree. But those people have every right and voice that you do. I remember one of my first years in the military is I met a girl who was an avowed communist. She said, I am sympathetic to communism. I think it could work. And of course, everything in my head exploded because I'm like, wait a minute, I'm a conservative Republican and serving this country. And I thought that pretty much everybody was doing that had some sense of patriotism. You're telling me that you're a communist? She says, oh no, like I'm a patriot too. I believe in this country. I just think that communism is the way forward for it. And you know what? I had to accept that. Like she's allowed to have that belief, right? We're sitting there talking at a restaurant after work. She's allowed to express that belief. Now, if she goes and sells our secrets to China, she's done something like definitely wrong. But for her to have a political belief system that I completely disagree with can make me mad, but it doesn't take away her citizenship because of the freedom of speech that is in right the Bill of Rights. We
Right.
people
Yep.
are allowed to disagree, and when you start to talk to people and you hear their side, very few of them go to that extreme. One of the things that I love about our page and what we do is that the more you explain libertarianism, Kyle, the more I find things in it that I like. There are other things
Yeah.
that don't make sense to me, but it's the same thing with Chris. Is Chris, one of the most interesting episodes we ever had is you were working me through what you thought of Hillary Clinton and how you praised her. But then when we came to Bernie Sanders, we actually kind of agree that he wasn't best, for this country, that he's not someone that we would necessarily support. And you told me, hey, there's other people that are friends of mine who do love Bernie, but I don't. And I was like, that's amazing that there are liberals within that movement, right? Who have differences of opinions, because we tend to see our own belief system as very nuanced, very intellectual, very rational. And then we look at other people, the enemy, the group that I don't like, the people, the communists, the liberals, the whatever they are, the moderates, the rhino, whatever you want to call them. And we think they're just these monolithic, lost idiots who have no sense of thought process of what they're doing. And then you talk to them and you come to find out, well, maybe this is why they got there. This is what happened in their life. They associate, there's so many people that associate conservatism with something that is entirely different than what I think of conservatism as Edmund Burke and Russell Kirk and George Nash and all these different authors that I think. They don't think of that. They think of someone totally different. And I'm like, oh, when I say conservative, I mean this. And they're like, I thought you meant that. Right? And so these terms start to lose meaning as we don't have any experiences to associate with them. So I'm open to it. What do you guys think as we go forward and start to wrap this up? What do you think are ways that we can take what we are doing here, having this conversation, and starting to answer what Jonathan said about the fact that people don't have a forum for it? I mean, we've got about 20 folks that are watching live now. I'm posting comments every day, but I want to bring this type of unity back to our country. I want people to have a conversation. I want there to be referees that we can trust, and to recover some of the American spirit that brought our country together in the first place, which wasn't just conservatives, of course. It was, frankly, more groups like this where people disagreed. So open to any ideas that you have. Feel free to take a shot. John, if you want to start, and Chris and Kyle, if you have anything to add, go for it.
I guess I'll use the time that I have to just encourage people's personal responsibility to their own self-awareness. I mean, I can go into a lot of other things about, reaching out to representatives and getting more involved politically in ways that are through the system to, of course, change the system in ways that are more aligned to ideology. But I think that what I would emphasize is just being able to have what's called, I hesitate to say this, but levels of consciousness. So what I mean by that is that on one level of consciousness, I am a dad, right? And I seek to do what's best for my child and try to support them and protect them. I'm also a husband, so I speak of these roles. But at the same time, like, I need to be able to, in certain situations, hold that role in suspension to be able to examine it in order to improve upon it. Find some other ways to be a better father, and to entertain the idea that maybe I don't parent as well as I should, or I could be a better dad. How can I look at this in a different way of my fatherhood or my husbandry? And I think that that's what we can do as well as members of our own political parties, of our own worldviews. Yeah. Is that as much as you can take the glasses off of your worldview and try and look and see, where am I blind? Oh, I had a blinder here. Why? Because I've never actually talked to someone who was gay. And I should probably do that because I don't know anybody who is, and maybe that's a blinder to my social connections, and I might learn something, right? Yeah, maybe it might offend me, but I should do that because that's a blinder to my worldview. And I think the more that we do that, the more that we can actually take the glasses off, look at our own worldviews as best as we can, see where we're faulty, see where it needs cleaning, see what needs to be, how we can see more clearly. That would be much more beneficial to all of us. It takes a lot of personal responsibility to do that.
It takes a lot of effort. It takes effort in this world to do it, is what you're saying. It's not going to be given to you. And so many things are given to you. You just turn on your phone and Facebook is going to give you a news feed full of, like, what people near you are saying, or people that, are close to your worldview. The same thing, that what you subscribe to, is going to, but you have to be purposeful. One of the big ones, just relating to what you said, for me was Islam, is when I first started to travel to the Middle East, right? And then I went to Afghanistan, I went to the Emirates, I went to Saudi Arabia. Is I realized on my first trip out to the Middle East that I didn't know any Muslims. I just didn't have anybody in my life that I encountered, being military and going to a Christian church. I really didn't have anyone who's Muslim. And I was terrified, like going out into the Middle East, walking around Dubai and places like that, of what I was going to encounter. And I started to realize that there were plenty of Muslims who frankly fit the description of what I thought, but there were huge portions of Muslims who didn't, who were just as nice as anyone. And some people who frankly call themselves Muslims, but honestly didn't take their faith all that seriously. It was just something that they called them. There was a whole spectrum from Orthodox and devout to people who are more secular and moderate, right? And you didn't know until you talked to them, maybe the way they dress, but then you'd be surprised because you'd have, girls who have like these high heels and stuff going on, as soon as they sit down, you're like, oh man, like they're totally, and then you talk to them and they have a smartphone, but they're in the full dress, right? So it was absolutely fascinating to me to see that nuance, and then to go from one country to another and see how it changed. And I started to develop some level of respect and a little bit of friendship with certain Muslims that I could. At the same time, I'm still watching my back, but I started to realize that there's more here than just some type of monolithic structure. And it helped me see it a little bit differently, and to be able to understand where they were coming from in their viewpoint, right? That's a blind spot. I think.
It reminds me of a John Stuart Mill quote, who, is a big free speech guy, libertarian guy, not a big fan of Burke, but that's okay. But he said, he who only knows his side of the case knows little of that. It's the idea that if you only know that, if you only know your side of the argument, you really don't know the argument. So it's reminds me of.
One of the things I think we have to do as a team, as a group, for people who are watching this, is we have to show the value of this. We have to bring that out, because people get the fire. They get the anger. It's easy to capture on film, someone yelling. It sells, right? It sells on social media, and it's addictive. I want to make that feeling that we're discussing, the enlightenment that comes from it, the nuance, frankly, the joy that comes from enlarging your perspective, of building relationships, of reaching people in different ways and having them educate you back. I want to be able to say that. I was thinking, John, and we'll have to talk about this on Conservatism on Tap, about Cobra Kai, because I've been all into season 3, and how they, cheesy as they are, how they dramatize fatherhood and the relationships that come with being a dad. And they make it so funny, and the acting with it, and how they relate to each other, and how they sort it, but without making it trivial, right, or stupid. They work through the difficulties. There is all kinds of broken relationships that need healing, and they work on that, but they show consistently the joys of mentorship and how that makes you feel, both as the kid who's being mentored and as the older guy who gets it back. And I thought, that is, regardless of whatever flaws the show has, that alone is a beautiful thing that our country needs. Is we need to show men why fatherhood can be a good thing, why it's worth pursuing. And I think that we have to show through this show, through our relationships, through our lives, through the people that we comment, why this is a good thing, why this is worth protecting, why this is preferable to the anger and the violence, and why some of the corruption can be prevented if we start to communicate with each other and we start to actually root out some of the bad elements and to steer people towards the good. So thoughts on that, Chris? I want to give you the last word, because you've heard from conservatives and libertarians all night. So go ahead, brother. Take it away for us.
So my wife and I just started Cobra Kai, and we binged all of season 1, and we love it. And I will say another great message of that show is how it shows the importance of seeing things through different perspectives, through different eyes. It's told from mostly the perspective of the villain of the original Karate Kid movie, but it creates so much empathy for him, and so much empathy for really every character, regardless of what side of a conflict they're on. And I think that's, if they can do it, then I think that we as a country can do that as well. I want to go back to Kyle's point about how it's important to remind our leaders of the obligations they have to us as individual citizens and us as the people. I think in a weird way today, both did not do that and did that at the same time. Because if you look at the literal motivation of these rioters, they were actually trying to overturn the will of the people. They were trying to overturn the will of the people on behalf of an authoritarian leader. That's not exactly small government. The people who were taking away the American flag and replacing it with the Trump flag were not doing so because they have a deep respect of the will of the people or because they believe in small government. But at the same time, we see these politicians now changing their votes on whether to certify the election. So I think if any good comes out of this really dark and tragic day in American history, it will be that many who have been misleading their constituents and who have been not taking their responsibilities to their constituents seriously have realized how far they have corrupted their minds, have realized and seen the monster that they have created, and hopefully will be more responsible in the future and will actually maybe focus on improving the lives of their constituents or standing up for the Bill of Rights or following the actual procedures and norms and rules of our government, of our Constitution, instead of trying to subvert them in order to win some kind of culture war. That's my hope.
Yeah, we've got to rise above, that notion, right? What is victory? There's a comment here by Susie, and I appreciate all the comments that came through and everybody who's watched the show. But she's talking about a double standard, and I have no doubt that exists in so many different places. But what does victory look like? Does that mean settling every score? Does that mean giving it back to everyone who's ever, spited you? I think that there's a better way. I think there's a better way, and that is we stop wasting time on networks that try to control us, only give us one side of the story, right? On politicians who do the exact same thing. And we start to reach out. We find our facts from a variety of sources, and then we filter them through a group of people. So I encourage you, this can be a place for that, right? You can reach any one of us on our website, on our shows every Sunday, but don't stop there. Is develop your own group as well of people like this. When you see something and it makes you think the worst about a liberal, and you're like, how in the world can this be? Ask your liberal friend, ask them what they think, right? When I say, if I see a libertarian doing something absolutely nuts, and I'm like, great idea, crazy party, what is this guy doing? Then you know what I do? I bring him on the show and I ask him myself, what's with the hat? Or I ask Kyle, and I'm like, and he's like, yep, that's just how libertarians are. We're a little bit crazy. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. Right? That's how you grow. That's how you don't stay in a bubble and just stew and say, you know what, I'm a victim. I got slighted. I can't stand this bias. You don't stay there. It's okay to be angry to some degree, but find resolution by reaching out to other people and understanding where this came from and then what to do about it. And maybe you'll find some level of nuance. You'll find people who agree with you, even if they come from a different perspective, and a way to be able to sort through this together. And I think if we start to do that, we start to coalesce a movement that may have conservative elements, may have liberal elements, moderate elements, but it all comes together on certain basic principles and facts. You saying it best of all, Kyle, that image of God in people, the equality that people have, the rights that they have to be heard, to be able to express themselves. And hopefully we've demonstrated that today. So, hey, thank you guys so much. This is so encouraging to me to be able to have to, again, see what's going on in the news, to be dismayed by it as much as I was by, other protests that I've seen throughout the year, other violence, and be able to not just sit back on my couch and say, oh, the world's going to hell, but to actually do something. And I feel like I do that when I reach out to you guys and we have this conversation, we come back empowered. So thanks again for what you do every single week on this show. Thanks for this episode. And I look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you, Wes, for hosting.